We've got an awesome panel today. Here, again, keeping on with this theme of trying to look at and understand how research roles evolve and how you demonstrate that you have the skills to be successful in those roles. Of course, we've got to end with like the head honchos, if you will. We've got a bunch of head honchos here. Amazing. I mean, they probably wouldn't call themselves that, but I'm going to call you guys that because you guys are great. Basically, at some point, you reach the top, especially in these larger companies, where you're running research. And that's what this panel is all about, is like, what does it actually mean to run research? So we have Beth Toland here, who is leading research at Asana. You may have heard of that. Great way to track your projects. Summer, who is now a VC, but previously was leading research at WhatsApp and G Suite and what I forget? Roblox too. So like, wow, cool. And Celeste, who's the head of research at Robinhood. Quick welcome to all of you. Maybe this tradition, let's start with like, how do we get into this stuff? Beth, you're closest to me. You get to go first.
How did I get into
research? Yeah.
I started in design, and I had a really great mentor who helped me learn that design isn't reactionary. It's about asking questions and what's the strategy. And then I moved to a company that prioritized research. They were an early peer to IDEO called eLab. And then I was like, whoa, that's even further back, man. Like, that's strategy, that's influence, and that just sort of like lit up my eyes, and I was on that path sort of ever since. That's my like very short path.
That's awesome. Summer?
Actually, I also studied design. So I studied industrial design in Canada, actually. And,
represent.
Yeah. And then I'll try to figure out what I can really do with this. And then the part that I really enjoy was the early stage, doing research. So I got on my job as a design researcher. I'm doing a lot of human factors and usability. And at the time, we were actually working for a company called Motorola. You guys, some Gen Z don't know that. So I was part of Motorola Enterprise division, where a lot of people don't know what nurses actually do, or the truck drivers. So we had a lot of influence because people had to rely on our information. So they were like asking all the questions. So that's how I started, like 20 years ago.
Amazing. Celeste?
I am not a designer, and I don't think anyone would ever trust me to design anything. So we can just like put that to bed. I studied psych, and I was kind of the Goldilocks of the psych department. So like at first I was really into neuroscience, and then I had to like hurt a rat, and that didn't feel good. And so I was like, never mind, not my thing. Then I moved on to social psych, and I was like, much love to the social psych folks in the room, but like, it was not for me. It was too vague, not really very applied. If you want to talk about it depends. It always depends in social psych. And so then I moved on to cognitive psych. It felt like a fit, and I specifically spent a lot of time in cognitive linguistics, where then my advisor mentioned human factors. And so I went on to study human factors, and that's how I got into research.
Amazing. Let's talk a bit about the role. And I think people have a pretty good sense of like what an IC researcher does. I think a somewhat good sense of what like a manager does. And frankly, no clue, in my opinion, like what the work of someone who's leading a function actually looks like day to day. Mm-hmm. And what their job to be done is, if you will. So, Celeste, when you think about leading the function that you lead and the role you play within the context of the company, what is your job?
What would you say you do here? My job is a lot of things, but I think a lot of people just assume that it's going to be people management, like you mentioned. Like it's just going to be more of that. What it ends up being, though, is also practice management. So like tooling, setting up programs and systems and things like that to solve broad problems. And then there's a fascinating amount of administration involved. So if you don't like budgets, make sure that you're passionate about getting an ops person who does. And then outside of that, like planning, headcount, and making sure that the people that do the work, which sometimes is also still me, are able to have that work go as far as humanly possible. So that's through relationships and all sorts of stuff. I think one thing that I also didn't know is that at this altitude, this is not specific to research though. I think design and everybody else goes through this. There's sort of like organizational and executive chaos on one side, and then you have people looking for stability on the other, researchers and managers looking for stability and like, can I just do my damn job? And you sit at that intersection and you have to help everybody on both sides navigate what the heck is happening.
So you're kind of like a fulcrum on a seesaw,
Yeah.
right, where there's things changing, shenanigans, quarterly results, and you're trying to make sure that shenanigans stays on that side while everyone else has calm, consistency, able to execute kind of thing?
Yeah, some people call it like being an umbrella or like a shit umbrella.
Yeah, we can swear.
Okay.
Good. But I don't think I think umbrellas are too protective.
Yeah.
You're not trying to pass it downhill necessarily. You don't want to just like take the tension and pass it on, but you do want to be able to like help people interpret it and turn it into like more of a positive force and keep the business moving forward.
So maybe like a shit intake valve that then prioritizes, sorts, and reroutes the shit.
Or like a water filtration system.
There you go. Yeah.
Beautiful. Summer, how would you characterize the role and what a successful person is doing in that role?
I think it really depends. So for my case, I was very fortunate to be a head of research in 4 or 5 different companies. So it really depends on understanding what is going on in each company. So I'll give you example. So WhatsApp, there was no research function before I came in. So try to figure out how is your leadership team actually thinks about research, and then who's going to be your champion, right? But very, very fortunately for WhatsApp, they really cared about user insights from the very beginning. And then the new CEO wasn't the founder. So he really wanted to make sure that we are focusing things by looking at our global based user group. So we had a very good position. And we actually, in fact, was a standalone function, not part of any other product or design, which was a very interesting and unique in a way. So that was the position. Then you try to figure out what type of programs and how do I build out this team. And the one thing that we did was try to really just kind of like, toolings and processes like establish, but at the same time, what is our kind of special strategic project that we can do to kind of educate everybody in the company because they never had a researcher before. And the one thing kind of stood out for us was we are growing so fast. WhatsApp was going through a rapid growth stage. So the new employees come in, and then we wanted to help them to better understand our users. So that became our kind of special project, and very, very well aligned. And it was very strategic for us to introduce who we are, and then also get them super excited about the new company, the new mission that we have as like making more people connected in a very meaningful way using our platform. So we work directly with our CEO and our leaders of the very key functions. And that's how I think, one of the things became very successful. And then that's kind of like the job that we had where for me, like figuring out what is going to be the next project. How can I help our team to better position and also like elevate in this sense or that sense? Not try to like compete with any other data function or nothing like that, but really try to figure out that right, partnership. So I think that's constant like figuring things out. And then it was similar at Roblox because it was a first time, nothing was there before, and then kind of try to figure out that with key people.
That's awesome. So there's a big part of evangelization and education. And obviously you picked a really good moment in an employee's journey into the company to get that initial touch point with them. Beth, anything like how would you position there? What do you think about the work you do there? Because by the way, you're also a very different kind of business than the experiences here. You're a B2B software and these folks are on consumer.
Yeah, I'm not sure if at this level, maybe it's as different, like who your customer is, but internally, once you hit a certain level of leadership in an organization, I think that's when that I think like your zone of influence and your zone of impact sort of changes. When you're IC, it's very research driven and very like deliverable driven, and then you get to manager, and then you start to kind of like push out a little bit and whatever organizational structure you have. Like we have pillars, but you've kind of like whatever your squad or whatever it is, and you start moving out. And then I assume Celeste and some of your levels too, is then you start to operate at more the company level. I think that's what you were saying with the with your analogy, is that now like your peers are different. Now your peers are heads of design and heads. And so now you're coming together and you're making decisions for your org, the entire R&D org. That's the role I'm playing. And then even at the company level. So it kind of switches. You kind of move from that area of expertise of research and you start to move into that area of expertise of people and business and operations.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. So which of this, the parts of the role as you've spent your first 6-12 months in it was the most surprising or the most different for you as you adjusted from being primarily a people manager to something like this?
I think that has to be a you question.
Why?
Because I've been at Asana for like 150 years. And so like, I just sort of like woke up and I'm like in this spot. Like it wasn't as delineated for me.
It's very organic.
You know what I mean? It's very organic. And I feel like you said that you were in your role for a couple of years.
Even just going from IC to management, it like you do it usually at the same company. You don't usually get hired to be a manager with no management experience. And so like, you're lucky if you do. But like to your point, I had that experience, but like going from IC to manager.
Yeah, that I can talk about. But they're like, once I got to this position, I just sort of looked around and I was like, oh,
I guess I'm doing
this now.
I think what I didn't realize what happened is the amount of like you become the address for the complaints, the praise, like everything comes to you. You're the person.
Right.
And so intellectually, I knew that, but like it was just like a deluge of like, now you're responsible for everything, and every strange person ever in every corner of the company has something to say to you on any given day. And so you get a lot of, it's like, I just remember it being very overwhelming at first because it was like, well, welcome.
Can you give some examples maybe of the good, the bad, and the bizarre that you might get?
Yeah. So the good is like things that feel appropriate. Hey, can you vet this like study that we're using from a third party to sort of like talk about a particular audience? We want you to like look at it with your methodological lens and approve of it before we show it to like 2,000 people or before we send out a PR thing. That feels like an appropriate reach out. And I'm like, yes, I could do that, or I could point you to someone who would. Bad would be like, everything sucks, you're the worst, and I'm going to escalate straight to the top instead of going to like that person's manager, and so forth.
Is that a consistent thing that'll happen just because you've got a lot of people working and so bad things are going to happen with some level of cadence? I
mean, when I had like, I would say past like 6 or 10 people, when you're like a people manager, you just get like something's always going on. Like you've always got some pain that's like something's wrong.
Because you're the escalation point.
Yeah.
They're like, I go to you, things get fixed.
Right.
I don't have to deal with all this, somebody's manager, go directly to them.
Right.
What does that get? Go you're in charge. You can make things happen for me.
Exactly. Yeah. Bizarre. It's like sometimes someone from the mailroom will be like, hey, can you talk to me about research? I was thinking
so many times.
There's so many other people with research and they're
right.
But of course, I want to help.
Like the function, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I don't know the difference between your teams and data or like analytics or some other insights team if there's a multiple and try to do a good job of kind of like, helping them kind of go through this journey. Not just like we do this research, but we're helping you to better understand in this XYZ, right? And then you think that you did a good job, and then like next week, the same question comes, sometimes from the same person. So I think those are kind of like the journey that you have to kind of embrace and go closer and closer. And then you need to have a champions who can do that for you when you're not there.
Right. Interesting. So let's talk a bit about, we actually a pretty relevant question, I think, from Brad Orego here on the remote chat, but the differences maybe qualitatively between someone who's in a senior manager role or maybe even a director role versus like senior director, VP, right? And someone who wants to kind of bridge that gap, what is the gap? How does that get bridged? Does it get bridged? Is that a thing?
Between what's the
like a senior manager or director to like senior director or VP or like taking that?
And then usually for research, depending on the company, the senior director or VP may not even exist, right? So it was very interesting. I was going from Google to Facebook company, right? Because I was going to WhatsApp. And then I was actually very pleasantly happy and surprised that they recently had someone became a VP research. And that was our first, and now they have a few others, which is amazing. So you try to figure out how is each company is looking at research, and how is your kind of like positioning and career is gonna like grow in these companies. And then you also try to figure out then how is that journey looks like, from a director, like senior manager to director, senior directors, and then usually they're the head of function at that level. So I think like knowing that for each company is also, I think, critical.
Yeah. Talk about gaps. Like, sometimes the scope just isn't there.
Yeah.
Like there has to be a business purpose.
Yes.
For you to just keep ascending in levels.
Yes.
And I think that the evolution of the research function is why we're now starting to see more and more VPs, is that like we've gotten to a scope and size as a discipline where there are enough of people and business impact to warrant people at that altitude. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, building up like culture. Yes, you have to know, and is there a business, but also the need for the business impact and the ability to articulate the value that you can bring at the business impact. And I think that is going back to what I was saying before, is that like you, role blend is kind of like what we call it, like the kind of like the more senior you are, the more you're able to talk the same language, and that same language is business.
Totally.
It's like, what's the business impact? What are the goals? If you can speak in that language. And I think the where we haven't succeeded as a research discipline to get there is when we're trying to like still prove our worth instead of saying like, hey, let me tell you strategically how we belong at this table with you. And not having that language, I think, is probably, to me, what I've seen the biggest gap. Like that is where you stall out, is like you're still you're too far in this line. Your center of gravity is back here, and your first team has to be that leadership team.
So let's even parlay on that a little bit. Like, I think only at this level can you see research for all of its wonderful charms and all of its quirks is maybe generous. All of you see all the challenges about the practice in the field from a level of why it's not working, I think, right? Because you are peers with all these people who are running these other functions, and they can tell you like, hey, you guys, it's just not working, right? And you can talk about why, right? And that sort of thing. What are the things that you're seeing happening, whether it's ICs or people managers, that just like structurally seems like we need to make changes here, or that were there areas for significant improvement, maybe? Putting y'all on the spot.
I used to say, this was back in when I was at Google, and some research friends will say, oh man, we need sorry, can I be really honest?
Go for it.
Yeah, like, oh, we need a therapy, and we come here and then we talk about sit at the table and all that, right? And then we talked about how, we need to divorce design. So we talk about things like that. But then now that I've been to many different companies, I think it really depends. I keep saying the same thing as like, what's the right spot? It can be part of design and still do amazing work because the impact and the business partnership is so good. It can be part of analytics team or data science team. It could be part of product. So I think that, yes, I think we need to think about the positioning and how we're located, functionally embedded or like standalone. But at the same time, like, how do you make that like partnership really strong and figuring that, out? I think those are kind of like coming together, but then it's not like one answer because a lot of people come and ask me like, how do you make your research function standalone? But I'm telling them it may not be the answer, you know?
I totally agree. Like, what is the purpose of
exactly
in that case? Like, it has to serve a purpose.
Yeah.
The research function, I used to feel very strongly too that like, we don't belong in this or that. And like that, it's where you sit organizationally matters only to the effect that it serves the broader research team. So like, does it help? If you're partnered with design really tightly because you report into design, the benefits that offers you has to do with like the direct influence you can have on design and like what's getting shipped. If you're your own entity, sometimes organizations don't necessarily listen to each other. And so when there's like a little bit more of like a closer proximity, that can really help. The other thing is like, do you really want to report to the CPO? Like sometimes that sucks. Just sometimes it's not great. And so having a little bit of distance from some of the other chaos going on can actually be really beneficial. It cuts both ways though. It's like if you report into marketing, you could have like a marketing leader. It just depends on the leader itself. Because the marketing leader could be like, no, you guys can only do this kind of research, or it's important that this research gets like snuffed out because it doesn't agree with me.
Yeah.
And so but that's like a leadership thing. That's not a functional thing or like an the substance of each organization.
Right. Can maybe let's talk a bit about how these roles get created and how you find yourself in one. And I think one of the themes from the first two panels was like, first one seems like it's very quite programmatic, and in some cases, the hiring happens without you even knowing where you're going to end up. Like, here's your employment agreement. I don't know where your team is. I don't know what you're going to be working on yet, but come on in, right? And then as you get a little bit more senior, right, there's a little bit more of the relationship orientation here. When you're leading a function, right? I mean, Beth, you already talked about how this kind of happened organically for you at Asana, where it just clearly they had the trust and thought you were going to be able to do it. Why bring somebody new in that they don't know? Let's just give it to like Beth, and you built out this awesome team and whatnot. So maybe there's, I'm presuming, and we can comment on it, that this importance of like trusted relationships here for getting a role like this seems very strong. Agree or disagree?
You mean within the company or?
Like landing a head of research, director of research, VP of research role. Is that accurate?
I would think that if you're going to a head of, if it's not your direct relationship, it's a relationship that the somebody is hiring has, because this is such a small community. They're going to say, our head of research, where did you come from? Robinhood. Fantastic. I know Robinhood. I know that company. I know they do great work.
Right.
Hired.
Yeah.
Even if you didn't have a direct relationship, that's my hypothesis, is that if you don't have one, you're either somebody knows somebody at that level, or you're coming from, you've got a brand halo and they know that.
Right.
I think getting first time, I think that's the hardest.
Yeah.
Say you're not head of research and maybe you want to be, and how do you navigate, right? So like your case, and maybe your case too, it happened organically. Maybe your role got expanded. I think that was a similar for me when I was at Google, at G Suite. And then it's tough because there's a lot of things to manage, and you can be true, like very honest to your manager. Say, my vision is this. So actually talking to your manager and then having that type of dialogue, I think is critical. And then also try to find somebody who has done that. It doesn't have to be the research function. It could be product, because there is a head of product. There's a product managers, or it could be data science. So you can find some other functions that are close to you and figure out how they become head of something, right? And then once you kind of figure that out, and then like you're somewhat qualified and had an opportunity to interview, I think that's a really good steps. But I think it's rather difficult. Sometimes you don't even know they're hiring,
Right.
and then there's somebody came, is going to be our head of function. So then it's also happening because of that relationships or some type of hiring things happening in the behind the curtain. So I think those are difficult. But you can also like be very proactive and seek out, especially if you're interested in certain verticals, and then you know that they don't have a head of research function because maybe they're part of design or part of data or something. Then you can actually start connecting with those people and ask, and then say a lot of early stage startups, or actually later stage more, because a lot of early stage don't hire UXers, but you can figure it out. Like, I love your product, I love this space, and I love to know how you guys thinking about research, because I only see ICs or only see like the manager level. You guys interested in like bringing somebody more senior? Does it even make sense to you?
Yeah, for earlier stage companies, totally.
Yeah.
I think that's to your point about relationships and the network, because the industry is so small. Even for management roles past a certain point in my career, I don't think I've applied for a job in like 10 years.
Yeah.
Usually I've gotten some sort of email from a recruiter, or somebody was like, hey, I heard from a recruiter, and I give them your name so you know.
Yeah.
Which is a very privileged place to be in. And it makes me feel really uncomfortable every time I say it out loud. So you're welcome. Like closest friends.
I think also like the relationship, if you're going internal, relationship gives you the chance, because like everybody knows you need a head of design, right? Everybody knows you need a head of product. Like nobody's going to argue with that open role that needs to get filled. But like the head of research, could easily just report to any of those other things. Why do you need a head of that?
Right.
And I think having a relationship is helpful to give you that, open the conversation. If you don't even have the relationship, then like even having the conversation to say like, let me tell you why you need to have, I noticed that we're all like, and I could do this thing for you. I think that is probably the most what I would think it does internally.
If we were to I think there's a lot of people who want to end up in a role like this one day. And the reality is it's not that many, right? So right now for sure. But even just the math on, for every director of research, you probably need to have an additional 19 human beings or 9 human beings that would have to report into that. So there's just going to be not a lot of those roles. If we were to kind of catalog some of the core pieces of advice for somebody who in 5 years or in 10 years wants to be in a position to get one of those roles, what are the things that they can work on now to start preparing themselves for that opportunity, to either make that opportunity for themselves, be ready when they see one, anything along those lines? Like what's the checklist to start thinking about for this sort of stuff?
I feel like I need to preface this with the fact that some of these are my own growth areas. So it's not like a checklist of like, be like me. That would not be helpful. But like one of the first things that comes to mind is leading through influence. So like you think about, there's different types of power, right? There's like the power that comes from the intersections of identity that you have or don't. There's power that has to do with like sort of where you sit in an organization, if you're like someone's direct manager or not. But then there's also influence, which is, I think, more powerful, because no one is actually like obligated to do what you say. And so, and that's something you can practice from the time you're like starting out as an IC in your first job. How do we all go towards the same goal? How can I like rally people around an idea that I have and get everybody on the same page? And I think it's, even when you do have those other forms of power at your disposal, they're not, if that's the first tool you reach for, it's like a cheap trick. And it's you're not you're probably not going to get what you need. So that's a huge one for me. Another one might be like context switching. It's exhausting how many contexts you have to switch. There are lots of ways to practice that. Take on projects from a bunch of different teams and places. You guys have any others?
I mean, for Mike, so I think there's two things. One is like kind of building up to what you were saying, the qualities wise. Yeah. So one thing that I'm also very challenged with and I'm practicing is how do you build up your perspectives, right? So that's could be terrifying and also uncomfortable, but then we are researchers. So we are able to do that, connect the dots and all that. But how can you do that in a way that it makes sense in the right moment and also try to figure out some other projects or, places that you can go and practice that, right? Because practice is, I think, very important. And then you can be better at that. So that, and another thing is focus. One thing that I've been working with my leadership coach is how to have the focus and be present and then really help somebody at the time and be present. So whether it could be some other functions, ICs, their managers, or could be anyone, that how can I really represent my function in a way that it is going to be very helpful. Mm-hmm. And then once you get a bunch of different things, like what is your priority and how are you going to navigate? And the focus is a really interesting thing because I've been trying to study and try to get better at it. Like once you get to a certain level, I feel like things are clear and I'm focused. And then there's a bunch of other things comes and then there's another level. It's like there's like climbing a mountain without like the top.
There's no end.
There's no end. So then how do you do that? And how do you also embrace not able to focus some days? And then how do you still, my day at the end of the day, I'm moving these fucking needles every day somehow, right? Whatever the needle was. I think that's from a quality kind of perspective, like the things that you can practice. But another thing is if you like, I think the understanding a company that you like to work for is, I think, very critical. If you like this vertical or this type of company or a company, then you can start researching and reach out to some people. And then if they don't have a function, start talking about it. Because usually people will reach out and just answer you when you reach out, via LinkedIn, eventually, right? It'll happen. And then that'll be a great way for you to practice how you think about your research function if they don't have one. And you can also understand how they think about in general, like learning from the customers and users. So then maybe that company is not good for you after talking to them a few times, or maybe you see an opportunity that you can express your thoughts and opinions about, oh, I think it's going to be that or XYZ. And then you keep practicing on that. So there's a couple ways. So, quality wise, and then some of the other ways to like reach out and practice.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to add on there?
I guess I would double down on this influence thing and the work. It's easy to get stuck in the mindset. Nobody's listening to our insights. Nobody's doing anything with our stuff. We can't. But if you have some really solid examples of being able to influence and make change with work.
An example about like how you took a situation where, or tactics that you might have used where a stakeholder or a group of stakeholders are not really fully paying attention. And it's like, all right, time to practice that influence, right? And so you did this intervention of some kind, or you changed your approach, and then maybe it wasn't perfect, but it got better.
Very recently, we had been talking about product quality for a really long time and how important that was. And it was more kind of conceptual and theoretical, and we all agreed that it needed to happen, but nobody was ever getting staff to it. And so it just kind of went on and on. And so what we did is we created a very concrete scoring process. And we were like, look, your score is really low. Do you like that? PMs don't like that. PMs want A. They want A's on everything. And we're like, you're getting a C. That doesn't feel good, right? And they're like, oh, we're going to put people on it right now. And that was like, it was so fantastic.
We got to pause. Like this is, sometimes I think it's really, for some reason, I don't know if this is true with other functions as well, but researchers, we just gave up all of our creativity 20 years ago, right? Where it's like, you can just invent a scoring card.
Yeah, we did.
You did. You just invented a scoring card, right? Here's a scoring card. You're getting an F. we can help you get an A+. Do you want help? And like, who doesn't say yes to that, right?
I love that you bring this up because the only other thing I can think of, and I don't know how you would build up this as a mindset, but like it's related to this conversation, is I joke that it's like having an anarchist mindset, but it's not anarchy exactly. It's just that you have to know that the rules were made by somebody and can be changed.
Yes.
Pioneer.
It literally invent anything at any time.
Yep. 100%.
Or
Yeah.
if someone made a decision, you can have them change that decision.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's like maybe a more professional way of putting it, rather than just going full out anarchy with it, is to talk about like hierarchical mindsets, right? Like you don't need to be rigid, and you're thinking about like, it's not my place to do things this way.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you have to honor certain hierarchies, but like you can work within them.
I love
So
this.
exactly. You're talking about with scorecards and frameworks, like make it up.
Yeah.
And I think that's another good, skill to bring to, like when you were like, what are kind of skills that you need to have? Like being able to effectively, creatively break the rules is like a skill. That's a skill to know like when to break the rule and when not to break the rule. And if you can do it at a certain level, and I mean like, meaning certain impact level, not like seniority, but that's going to really demonstrate your decision-making ability. It's very important.
I think that this has kind of permeated a lot of the things that you said around how you affect change, how you manage. I'm reminded of a story from Patty Carlson, who's now leading research at M&T Bank, when she used to be at MailChimp, and they implemented this really big change to their operating model, and it really pissed a lot of people off at MailChimp. And it was really important that people understood why, so that they would actually like engage and whatever. And so the 4 people who were involved in this decision, so the head of research, the research ops manager, like head of design, a couple other people, got together and filmed themselves. I don't know if you're familiar with the hot ones on YouTube, aggressively hard chicken wings until they're like sweating and want to puke. And they did that, right? They're like, we understand that this is painful and difficult for you, so we're going to answer questions about this. And every time we answer a question, we're going to do the next chicken wing. And they're sweating and like teary, and it's horrible. Everybody watched it.
Yeah.
Of course they watched it, but they were able to communicate effectively. And unfortunately, there's no like list of like influence playbook where like one of them is like the hot ones page where you read that and be like, okay, I'm going to execute this way. But that's a lot of times how we think about our methods, right? You know, we have like our list of 15 methods, and that's how you do the work. But that is all it's made up. And at this level, you need to find ways to be effective that are often not done before, maybe.
Actually, I wanted to add one thing here. Is that stuck with me when my manager told me when I was at Google, is that we had this discussion, and then say, oh, like design is a making function, product, they're making function, but we're influencing function.
Mm-hmm.
So that really gave me an opportunity to just think about what are the ways that we can do to influence somebody, right? And then have this very safe place. And the things that like I'll say to other people as a head of research is that, we're in the business of moving the hearts of people, So at the end of the day, somebody comes to your research findings presentation, and let's make sure that they remember. It needs to be memorable. And like we use the word impact a lot, like impactful and memorable. And then if that is an end output, like what are the things we can do? Is it video? Is it the scorecard, heat map? Is it chicken wings, donuts, or whatever that may be, right? So they gave us a lot of interesting ideas. And then, working for a large company like Google, Facebook is great because you have some budget. So we actually hire our third person in our group, actually at WhatsApp Research, was a storyteller, digital storyteller, because we said the researchers like, I love to do this, but I suck at this.
Mm-hmm.
Can you help? Then, contractors, quick, let's actually work with the person and see how we can unlock all the, this creative juice that we had as a researcher. So that's how we kind of came up with some of the interesting,
that's really cool.
Project. And then we ended up, building on that, ended up getting some, videographer coming to our session, to like help us, because a lot of times video editing is very hard, even shooting is hard, then I have to focus. So we're trying to figure out many different ways to do this and then like unlock things without like, oh man, I cannot do that, or I cannot do that.
We could probably talk for another hour just about influence.
Yeah, maybe
Yes.
we should. This will be a good follow-up event.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions here right here? Megan, yeah, what do you got?
I'm curious, like, it's around ownership and like accountability, executive leader, and how that translates. And you even tie it like sometimes as we're moving up the hierarchy, we have expectations around certain level of influence. We're not afforded the resources for that, or maybe there's a lot of wants to do, but their behaviors are not making that happen. Yet you're still asked to make this happen. And so, as research, like, how do you take working to empowering your team?
So high level, it sounds like it's around you have ownership and accountability to particular goals. You don't necessarily have the resources to do it in the obvious way or the way that you would like. How do we navigate both being accountable to those goals without necessarily having what you want to accomplish those goals?
Is that way? I feel like I'm misunderstanding the question. Is the accountability about we're being held to something we can't achieve based on what we have? Is that okay? In that case, back to anarchy.
Yeah, that's right. Redefine it.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah.
I'm going to tell you that I can't reach them, but I'm also going to give you, I think Vivian Cassell calls this a good no. I'm going to tell you what I can do with what I have. And I'm going to make it clear what the trade-offs are.
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't ever be, I'm holding you accountable and me being like, okay, even though I don't have the resources for that, I guess I'll just sit here and correct. Like that would be.
In most cases, I think I set it up. Like I create it and then I educate them, right? Because I don't want like my leaders think that I can do this all the time for 5K or 2Ks that they gave me.
Yeah.
So like you got to figure out like what are you doing and how are you gonna like what impact you're making. So you're kind of constantly educating them. But most of the time, I'm creating my goals and my North Stars and everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you don't redefine it, then I think you're in a really terrible spot, because then you do it once and they're like, well, you can do it. You do it fine. And so right now I'm in the process of trying to tell my team, like, for heaven's sake, say no. Because if you don't say no, I'll never get more resources. I can never say, oh, we can't do it because you guys keep doing it and you're suffering. I can't have that. So redefining, I mean, just help them. And again, I think that's another signal of leadership, of being able to say, hey, I can speak your language. I see what you've got. And let me tell you as a peer, what can actually happen, because of the delivery, because of the delivery roles versus the influence roles, I find a lot of times they just don't know what is possible with research.
Right.
PM's job is to ask for the world. They're just like, I'll ask for this and see what I can get. Right. And if you can't artfully push back, then you are going to be stuck in that position. And I think to show up as a peer and say, like, I am the expert in this field. Let me help you understand what's viable. A lot of times they'll be like, oh, thank you. Now I've learned something.
That's awesome.
To be fair to the ICs, though, it's not on everybody to say, like, on each individual contributor to say no all the time, especially if you're pretty early.
For sure.
I think that was the second part of your question.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Did I just think that? For me, I think a good thing that we can do is set that tone with our partners at whatever level. So, like, if we're going to the CPO, if we're going to the product leaders in each, what did you call them? Not pillar. You said
Squad.
Yeah.
Whatever sort of business units or whatever you have, making sure that everybody top down is like, you need to maybe back off a little bit on like your demands. It can come from both directions, but it almost feels unfair to put all the onus on the individual all the time, because you can say no gracefully and still just like get assaulted with a bunch of demands.
Well, this is what you were saying earlier on, right? About like when Alec first asked you what your job was, you were like, there's like operations, like I'm trying to create systems for the team to make sure that there are ways to say no, so that it's not just like go back and tell them, but like creating an environment and like the actual systems and tools to enable that.
One thing that we did, I used this chart above the line, below the line thing. So we publish our trackers. So we were saying no because we need to do yeses. So I'm trying to also change my IC's mental models a little bit. You're saying no, but you're actually saying yes.
Yeah.
Because you have these 5 things that we're going to kill it and do a really good job of getting the no's into yeses, right? So we were changing their mindset and then help them to also direct, like, these are the things that I'm working on, right? And then also publish it so that you are educating your partners really well along the way. Yeah.
I think one final question that I'd like to end on, which I think hopefully some demystification has happened here about what the actual work is about. For each of you, finish the following sentence. Try and be an executive researcher if, and definitely don't try and be an executive research if. How would you end those sentences, right? Maybe we'll start with the positive one.
Wow.
Well, didn't you start with that when asked, like, if you don't like, I feel like that was even part of your, I think if you don't like people as a craft, if you're weighing the difference between research as a craft and people as a craft, you have to want to make people your craft, and organizations your craft, because you really move away from the craft of research, and that you have to do these other things. So if you feel like you want to do IC work all the time, if you want to deliver research projects, I think it's going to be really hard for you. It's not impossible, but I just think that it won't be the priority. You won't be able to prioritize that. And you might be sad about that.
Yeah. I mean, if you love building an org, right? Your team, you're building culture, building part of the company and the company.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, the main thing. That's why I think the other head of function also have a similar, thing. So that's why you can talk to a lot of people. You can make your board of director who's going to support you, right? But I think these are the skill set or the passion you need to have. And then we're in a great position because we can say, because we are representing our customers and users, you can use that to like build such a positive culture for the company, because ultimately we're building our product for our users. So if you don't want to listen to users, maybe you're in the wrong company. Anyway, so kind of thinking about that and how we can use our power of research, like the things that we can deliver to really build something greater.
I don't know if I have a positive one, only because I think that every leader, this is not true of research, but like every single leader I've ever met does that same job differently. So like somebody would come in and do the job you're doing totally differently, and that's okay. And it's actually desirable because you are great at certain things, and I love that for you. But like, so there's not a lot of like, if you like doing this or you don't like doing, or if you don't like doing this, there's a few of those. But if you're good at certain things, maybe you'd be the kind of research leader that like I think is good, but that doesn't mean that you're the only kind that's good.
Right.
It's so I'm struggling to think of like one thing.
So what are your negatives then?
Yeah, for that one, I think critique. Like I think people think about people management and even just like being a research leader in general as like, this is something I aspire to without really having a reason why. But if you have any sort of allergy or sensitivity to critique, being the face is a really good way to get kicked in the teeth. So you should probably work on it. Go to therapy. Like plug for therapy. It's tough. And there's a lot of your people pleaser. Like it's not that you can't do this job, but it's have to have a lot of hard conversations. Sometimes you have to wait to do all this stuff that isn't glamorous or fun, and it's not at the forefront.
Right.
And it's not research.
And it's
It's not research.
so like, yeah, if you want to cry over your graduate degree, this is a good way to do it.
I mean, one thing related to that, one thing you can start practicing, doesn't matter your IC or managers or head of research, is that working on giving and receiving feedback.
Yep.
So along with my focus thing, feedback was the other one that I worked with my coach for the past 7 years. I'm like, why is it so hard to give and receive feedback, right? And then, you know, you hear feedback is a gift. Sorry.
Doesn't feel like a gift.
Gift, because as a giver, I'm excited to give it. It's always, you know, twice a year, most of companies. You have performance management, you know, discussion. Oh my God, when you like landed in calendar, you're thinking, oh, I'm so excited tomorrow. I mean, yes, maybe you could be a superstar, but generally I'm like, even if you're a superstar, like, what did I do wrong? Like, what is going to be? It's, as a receiver and giver, it's both uncomfortable. But if you're practicing it, right? Because I learned this from other companies, some great leaders. Soon as they're down from the stage, presenting something, asking, how did I do? Can you please give me a feedback? If it's real time, life, specific to a project, then it's not personal. Let's just practice that. And how can we bring it to the company and my team? I think it's very important. You don't have to be a manager to do it. You can be just IC and then just keep practicing it. I think that'll help you making these gray muscles later on as a manager, head of function, and able to do that. And then even my coach told me, like, if you're receiving a feedback that you don't like, figure out a physical, maybe technique. Just pretend you're writing. Yeah, see, you're listening, so you're getting over it. Because at the end of the day, communication, right?
Yeah.
You want them to listen from you, or you're also able to listen.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I think we're going to end right there. Thank you so much to the three of you for shedding some light on this. And that's a wrap, everyone. Thank you very much for coming out.